We're continuing in our series, What is the Purpose of the Judgment Seat of Christ? So grab your Bible and let's get started. So we're working our way through James chapter 2, verses 14 to 26, which are these verses. James is really showing us how works and faith are not opposed to one another, but that they work together in hand and glove, and that works are evidence of a genuine faith. You know, God's gift of grace and our good works, they really interact with each other even like a spousal relationship. Suppose you bought some flowers for your wife. Would she take those and hide them? I don't think she would. No, she would trim the stems and arrange them in a vase and place them in some kind of a prominent place. And by doing so, she would in effect be giving back to you the gift that you've given to her. You know, she prepares the flowers and puts them in a place where all can enjoy. So she's returning the gift to you that you've given to her. And if someone asked your wife, you know, who's responsible for the flowers? She would reply, you were. And if someone asked you, who's responsible for the flowers? You would reply, she was. So in the same way, faith and works in a relationship with God are interplaying with one another, the heart and the hands, just as they would in a practical relationship. Now, James asks this question in verse 20, do you want to be shown, you foolish person, that faith apart from works is useless? You know, we saw last time, you know, the example of someone saying to someone who is in physical need, well, I wish you well. I really hope the best for you, but not actually doing anything. That really calls into question the genuineness of their I wish you well. Likewise, in a spousal relationship, if you say, oh, I love you, but you never demonstrate that love in any practical way, it kind of calls into question the genuineness of the expression of love. Well, likewise, faith that are not confirmed in some way by righteous works are really useless. And James wants to propose an illustration. Okay, you guys do you want an illustration? Do you want to be shown? Okay, I'm gonna show you guys. And he's going to show them from the Old Testament. Isn't that interesting? He's appealing to the Old Testament to show that faith and works go together. You know, there's just as much faith and grace in the Old Testament as there is in the New Testament, and there's just as much works and righteousness required in the New Testament as the Old Testament. There really is a continuity between the Old and New Testaments. God hasn't changed and people haven't changed. And so James appeals to Abraham as an example. He's our father, the father not just of ethnic Israel, but the father of all who believe. How was Abraham put right with God, justified? How is he exonerated before God, vindicated before God? He says, well, wasn't he justified by works? And he gives the time when that occurred, when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar. You'll recall that account. It's in Genesis chapter 22. So James is proving his point that faith without works is not a genuine faith. You know, God promised Abraham that he would be the founder of a new nation. That's over there in Genesis chapter 12. And years later, when he had no offspring, and asked God, are you going to keep your word? That's in Genesis chapter 15. God promises that his descendants, that is Abraham's descendants, would be like the sand and the stars. And when that happened, Genesis tells us that Abraham believed God. He had faith in God. This is not just believing in God. This is believing God. It's one thing if I say, I believe that you exist. And if I said, I believe in you. Abraham doesn't just believe that God exists, but he believes in God. Abraham believed God. And it was counted to him as righteousness. In other words, what makes a person righteous before God? It's this, faith. What does a righteous person do? A righteous person has faith in God, trusts God. That's the right thing to do. And a righteous person does the right thing, and when you sin and do the wrong thing, then the right thing is to go to the God of mercy and grace and receive his counsel, receive his restoration, to receive his forgiveness. So by appealing to this story of Isaac on the altar, this is the conclusion James draws in verse 22. You see that faith was active all along with his works, and faith was completed by his works. Remember, so go back to the story again. So Abraham, this is in Genesis 22 now. So in chapter 12, God calls Abraham, you're going to be the father of a great nation. In Genesis 15, he confirms that call and says, your descendants will be like the sand of the sea. Finally, a miracle happens, and Isaac is born. And then in Genesis 22, God says, take Isaac and sacrifice him on the altar. And Abraham goes through with that. Why is that such an act of faith? Because Abraham believes that if I go through with this and sacrifice Isaac on the altar, then God will have to resurrect him, because God has made me a promise that I would be the father of a great nation, and through that nation, all the nations of the world would be blessed. And Isaac is God's fulfillment of that promise. And so that was an act of great faith to take Isaac up on the mountain. And it was faith. It was a work that really confirmed the genuineness of Abraham's faith. So here's the conclusion of the matter in verse 24. You see then, a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. That is, while we are saved by faith alone, the faith that saves never stays alone, but is always accompanied by works of righteousness. And it is a faith that is evidenced and confirmed by works of righteousness that is a genuine faith, a justifying faith, and a saving faith. Until next time, the Lord be with you.